Hi, Ashok. Welcome to Within the Turns. Excited to have you join us.
Well, good morning, Praveen. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited about the opportunity to spend a little bit of time together.
For sure, yes. So let's start with the very beginning of your story. You were born in this country and you ended up getting a first job in hotel chain. Your first car was a 1970 Cadillac DeVille. And then you went on to become a CEO of a leading health tech. So for our audience today, who is Ashok Sudarshan?
Thanks for that. You brought back some great memories. I guess a couple of things I'd say. My folks came over to the U.S. in the mid 1950s, both to go to graduate school and pursue some higher education. The original plan was for them to come over here, study, and then go back to India. But one opportunity after another presented it for both of my parents to be working here, and they ended up raising me and my brothers in this country. We moved to Texas from the Northeast in the early 1970s, and so I really consider myself to be a Texan.
Okay.
As you mentioned, I started out with that 1970 Cadillac, which back in the day was a car with a big engine, but in Texas we like to have gasoline-powered automobiles, so it was a great experience for me. In answer to your question around it, I did my undergraduate degree and then came out, worked in the hotel business. Did it for a couple of years, but realized that education was really the ticket to the next stage in my life. And so went back to graduate school, got an MBA, and then moved on into consulting and doing technology work. And then, as you mentioned, some of the other things that led me to being CEO of a company.
Fascinating story. And I believe that car was 18 feet long?
It was. In fact, a little vignette that was there. At one point, my parents decided to build an addition to the house. And there was great consternation because the addition was not long enough for the car. The car was sticking out of the back end. So we had to do a little additional construction work in order to cover all of the extent of the car in that Texas sun.
Fascinating story. So let's start with the something I want to dive into is on your memories. So, tell us about your most precious childhood memory that you believe sort of makes you who you are today.
It's a great question also. I guess what I'd say is I was very fortunate growing up. My father's a university professor by training and used to spend half the year in India and half the year in the U.S. So during the U.S. academic year, he was here teaching. And then in the summers and then at Christmas time, when there was a break in the U.S. system, he would go back and work in India. So when I was 6 years old, my mother packed me off with my dad and sent me back to India, just the two of us. And my dad dropped me off at my grandparents' house and said, I'll see you in a little bit. That turned into 3 months. But I really grew up spending a bunch of time in India with my cousins, and from then have always had a great appreciation, not just for that side of my life, but really for the opportunity to travel and see other parts of the world, and then really recognize the benefits of growing up in this country with the opportunity that was presented to me. So when you say about childhood memories, I think it brought together my love of my family, my pride in being an Indian, but most importantly, the things that come and how many sacrifices my parents made along the way so that I really could benefit and enjoy growing.
So it seems like you had an opportunity to, spend time in India for an extended period. So it's not like, a couple of weeks, but almost 3 months to your point.
That's right.
So anything you remember from those days, especially in time in India?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a couple of things that were really interesting to me was how quickly it became easy to become native. And when I say that, that means whether it's speaking Kannada in the house with my family, whether it was running around and doing the types of things that typical Indian children did, if it was walking everywhere as opposed to driving as people did in the US. I think the things of how quickly we adapt when we're young and how much harder it gets when you get a little bit older to make the transition was probably number one. I think the second thing that was really important was the Indian society, as far as I was concerned, everybody was an aunt or an uncle. And so there was a great amount of respect for people in the older generation, but also this familiarity of they're part of the group that you get to interact with. And I certainly miss that being on this side of the ocean. Sometimes I think we forget about how important the relationships are that exist both personally and professionally and how they get blended together.
That is so true. Yes, right. Yeah. So any of the memories from childhood that you think are shaping you even today?
I definitely think so. I think, a great deal of time, as I said, spending time learning and listening to history, family history with people who were over there and recognizing that history is such an important thing. I think tremendous devotion in my family to religion, although we wouldn't be what you consider to be hugely religious. Certainly there was an aspect of praying in the house every day and being respectful and following a particular set of rules, which My family always kids me that I'm a rule follower, but I think it got instilled in me from a very early age that there were ways that you conduct yourself and ways that you don't. And then I think the last one is I just have such tremendous memories of trying different types of food when I was in India. And I think it opened up an appreciation for, hey, wherever you go, try the things that are available to you. And that started with food, but it's moved on to whatever experiences, different religions, the types of music that you get to interact with, et cetera. Any level of the fine arts comes from being an open person and wanting to enjoy those things. And sure, you'll make a couple of mistakes along the way, but you also will probably be surprised at how many enjoyable experiences exist.
Yeah, I remember when I moved to this country, and unlike you, I was born in India, then came here. The experiences can be quite vast. So, have you ever done that 23andMe, where you sort of start to think about building a family tree and see where people are coming from? Have you tried
Yeah, I
that?
don't think so much the 23andMe in particular because our family tree is pretty well identified. I think we can go back several generations, and my family is very regionally focused one way or the other. But I think the corollary to that is when I talk to other people and they explain where their families came from, and I can liken to, well, we started off in this particular region. In Indian history, we tend to be very regional in our focus. We stay in the same community. We get recognized by somebody's name. It's actually another thing that gives me great pride and to know where I came from, etc.
Very cool. So, do you believe the 10-year-old Ashok would be able to predict where Ashok is today?
Absolutely not. I think there are days where I have to pinch myself. I think I grew up thinking at some stage of my career after professional work, I would end up being maybe a person in the management team, et cetera, of a fairly large company. But I think if I look back on the history of my career and my personal life, it's just unbelievable to me the opportunities that have presented themselves to me. I've made some mistakes along the way, and Praveen, you and I have talked about a few of them. But generally speaking, I think being open to opportunity has really made the world a much more enjoyable place, and my professional career so much more interesting than it would have been if I'd done kind of the typical path. Perhaps the biggest surprise that I've had along the way was the opportunity to be CEO of a company and really guide it through a transaction, which does not happen to a lot of people. So unique experience all the way along, and something that I've been able to use. Also help me understand that's not really the number one thing that I want to do. I'm much more interested in the development of people who work on my teams, and most importantly, the delivery of the commitments that we make and the contracts that we make.
So let's just stay with those memories. So when young Ashok was traversing between UK, US, and in India, what are some stark contrasts that you were able to see and then have to work through in terms of both of studies and schools and whatnot?
Yeah, I think a couple things jump out at me. Number one, I think the world, once you leave the US, tends to be much more patient and move on a combination of relationships and understanding. We in the US tend to be very impatient. We look at how quickly can I get a contract done, how quickly can the revenue flow in, et cetera. But it's not really around the length of the relationship. It's not really around what's the long-term value of working together to develop some of the other things. I often say with our team in my current company, when we sit down across the table, it's very important that we explain to clients, here's what we're doing today, but what really are your business problems and how can we modify our model to support that? I think once you leave the US and you're interacting with people on more on a global stage, you find that it is much more around let's craft something together. I think that also goes towards the relationships that you have with people. I think in this country we tend to be pretty antiseptic. We're racing from one meeting to the other. We're looking at our phones trying to knock off task after task after task, instead of thinking about, hey, when am I going to take an hour to sit down and read something? Or when am I really going to do some research on a particular interesting topic? Or when am I actually going to take time to have some social interaction with the people? And I hope at some point in the future we come back around to that, because I think we've really lost the enjoyability of life going through the process. We're so transaction focused nowadays that we forgot to enjoy just living life and what's in front of us day to day.
That is true. So how do you keep that sort of your sense of this super high energy and then still have an attitude to sort of learn and experiment as you go along? How do you sort of keep up with that?
I think there are two things, but probably the most important for me is a discipline around at a particular time of the day. I cut off doing work for a break of several hours. I have found, especially a little bit now that my children are gone and we're empty nesters, that it's very important to invest time with my wife and us having a personal relationship and spending some time together for a couple of hours. Almost every evening, we either watch a show together, we sit down and have a discussion about something, or maybe even just cook together in the kitchen. But that relationship's really important, and that's a really good mentoring early on in life, that if you've reached this stage and you're not stopping to enjoy it, you kind of are missing the boat. That was the whole reason that you raised the children, is to be able to enjoy this time together. So spend a lot of time doing that. I also do try to carve out time for other people who are important to me and spend, hey, hour, 2 hours, let's put the phone away and let's really have a discussion. Last thing I'd say is my wife and I had made a commitment about 10 years ago that we're going to invest in the community and do some nonprofit work. So we generally team up together doing work for charities, so that A, we're getting to spend time together, but B, we're both putting our foot forward on that relationship and then engaging in our community on so many great needs that are out there where we can be helpful.
Yeah, I know you and I were talking about this, some of the effort that you're putting in, especially on the children and the kids. So how do they thrive? How do they learn? How do they sort of really find a way to sort of unlock their potential? And I think that's really, really important. So maybe say more on what you're doing in that space.
Yeah, I think that's a great lead into how we got here. I think, look, there are a number of great charities that are out there. I think we all get solicitations in the mail or by phone or by email that are asking us for money, and we write a check. But I think sometimes when you have to take a step back and realize, what are the things that really motivate? For me, as you mentioned, Praveen, we've really focused much more on children. I think one reason for that, my wife is an early childhood educator, and so I think that's important. I think my parents were teachers also, and so education and the things that come with it, recognizing how much opportunity gets presented when you have a healthy environment in which to grow up and to go to school and then to continue to evolve over time is very important. I think the second thing is, look, let's face it, the children are the most vulnerable portions of our society, with the exception of maybe the elderly. And if we harken back to what we talked about, where you and I grew up in a world in which we respected our elders and did a lot for them and feel a sense of responsibility, the children are still left alone. And unfortunately, there are an inordinate number of them, and you read these stories, and it's very easy to become involved in a number of these efforts that are going on in whichever community. For me, it's there's some elements that are related to Scouts. There's some stuff that I do in child abuse area, etc. But I think that there are any number of where we think that children are really the ones who need the most help.
So you clearly had a rich experience across the borders, across the countries, build relationships, with elderly, etc. as well. Are there things you think that you used to value that you don't today?
Yes, I think that, boy, I couldn't agree more. Maybe it's a part of my evolution. Maybe it's because I'm slowing down a little bit. But to me, in the old days, when I originally started my professional career, it always seemed like I was about knocking out tasks. So I did a lot of project management and consulting, program management early on in my career. And for there, in that professional world, success is measured by getting the project done, closing out the project, getting the final payments, and then moving on to the next and the next and the next. At some point, what I recognized was there's always an endless stream of things that need to get done. So you're never going to be finished. Much better to focus on what's the business impact and how are we making sure that we continue to iterate and do a better job for, whether it's the client, whether it's for a relationship, whether it's for a spouse, whether it's for the charity, etc. So my focus has shifted from trying not to knock out all the things on my to-do list, but to think about, have we really increased or enhance the relationships that we've got that are going around with this.
So something struck me when you said that. So imagine a young 22, 23-year-old kid, a software engineer, product manager, sales guy. What can they do today? Given your experience across business, tech, etc. Just curious of what would be guidance to those kids today.
Yeah, I think there are two things that would jump out at me. So number one is managing expectations. I think often, especially young people, think that they know what the expectation is and what they need to get done in terms of driving the company or their job performance, etc. forward. But they never stop to say, what exactly will be success, or what are we looking to accomplish? So I would suggest to people, you don't have to do it every day, but periodically just pause and say, what's the definition of success, and the activities that I'm focusing my energy on, are they really continuing to drive that success? Are we moving in the right direction? And back to the example you raised, when I first started my professional career in the hotel business, one of the tasks that was on my list was cleaning hotel rooms. And so it was, how quickly can I get through 16 rooms? And then there was a later stage in my career where I used to check people in at the hotel. And so if we had a long list of check-ins, I just wanted my line to go. But as that evolved, I think that thing has moved more into, well, sure, I did the 16 rooms. What's the next thing? Is there something else that's broken that we need to fix? And in the second line, okay, well, we got the person checked in, but are they at the stage now where they really understand all of the functions of the hotel and capabilities that are there? Do they enjoy it? I think the same thing's true about the professional experience for our employees now in the work environment. And this is particularly important because we used to hire on to one company when I was young and stay with that company for the duration. Now people move from opportunity to opportunity because things are available to them. I would just suggest you look to what is the next definition of the thing you're trying to solve or success, etc., and use that to be your guide of when is it time to move on, when is it time to consider something else, and most importantly, are you satisfied with what you're doing for your job? We all work entirely too hard not to like what we do. So I don't expect, I think all of us recognize we get a paycheck because it's work, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't like the environment in which you work in. You should feel good about what you do. And I'd suggest periodically, if you're not doing that, life is very short. You need to do some self-analysis about what is the thing that motivates you, and then move on to the next opportunity.
Absolutely. And I know you today very well engaged in the seniors care, especially people with complex conditions today. So, someone who was helping with, checking hotel lines to today, tell us more about how the journey happened. How did you sort of moved into it? And I know maybe something else you want to spend time on is you moved from tech to business to leadership, management. So maybe share more on that part.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, I had gone to work in the hotel business and then quickly realized I wanted to go back to graduate school. A couple of reasons. One, I thought if I stayed in the hotel business, which I liked, but it's a very long path to get to senior leadership in a hotel, just the nature of that business. I think the second thing I figured out was if I didn't go back to school after a couple of years of working in the hotel business, very quickly you get involved in a different phase of life. You get married, you have children, it becomes much more difficult to go back to school. And one's energy level of going back and sitting in a classroom and going through that kind of dissipates. So it was important to me to go back to school after 2 years. When I came out of college, I had this great opportunity to go into technology consulting work. And I think you and I talked about this, had the opportunity to go into a world-class organization with Anderson Consulting, that's now called Accenture, but at that time was called Anderson Consulting, and do really large-scale systems work. And I found a great passion and love for that at that time. I do think as I moved through my career and recognized as I moved to further levels of leadership and not just executing day to day, but selling and crafting solutions, etc., that I really wasn't a hardcore tech guy. I was much more of a business guy that was hiding in IT clothing. And the reality of this is technology has evolved to the point now that the hardcore technology work we used to struggle with in writing code for COBOL or some of these other languages has become much more automated and much more effective. So therefore, people who are really good at understanding what the business wants to do and translating that are really in short supply. So for me, I was incredibly fortunate that as the technology skill set was increasing, the need on the business side was really evolving. So I had this chance to make the transition. And so I switched from being primarily being an IT guy into being more of a business guy. And again, had this great opportunity with some of my former colleagues from Anderson who had gone to work at United Health Group and said, look, we've got to rebuild all of the systems because healthcare has so many challenges and the systems are very old. So got this great opportunity to go over there and work more on the business side. And really what I found is we need to be moving much faster on the business side to solve the healthcare challenges in this country. I don't know of a person who says that we don't have enough money in the system. The challenge is always we're not efficient and we're not delivering. So that efficiency and delivery, if you look at the amount of innovation that's happened in the marketplace, has 100% been driven by the fact that we're not willing to be satisfied by the old models, and we see much more effectively how we can change how delivery happens. And I think we'll look back I know I'm sure at some juncture talk about AI, but I'm sure we'll look back in 5 years or 10 years and be shocked at the amount of innovation we delivered, even in this time period, as intimidating as it is to us today.
I want to unpack something. I think you said something very insightful about the translation of the business to IT. And many times that stream sometimes gets broken up. And then there's a very significant and serious sort of downstream effects of that, right? And during the pandemic and even post-pandemic, we saw this sort of resurgence of digital front door. A lot of money got spent for a lot of different things, and we still found there's a lot of initiatives just didn't deliver any goods or any value of it. So how did you sort of found your time through that, found the value through those times, and do you really see that, especially for the seniors, how do you really build a front door that actually matters?
Yeah, the situation in the pandemic really forced us to consider all of the delivery models and required us to really be, I think, much more innovative in a very short time frame. I think two things drove that. One was certainly the fact that there was a lack of infrastructure. It reminds me a little bit of when 9/11 happened. I remember President Bush said he recognized how terrible the technology infrastructure was. He couldn't communicate with the people that he needed to in a critical time, and we've just gotten complacent. I think the same thing happened for us in the healthcare world. We recognized our ability to interact with one another was almost 100% dependent on our ability to physically be in contact with one another. And we started to recognize, wow, there's been a tremendous amount of development. And for us to be able to get to people, we needed to develop different channels. I agree with you that the digital front door did not deliver on all that it was hopped up to be. But I do think we figured out that telehealth was going to be critically important. And I think the next stage is, for those of us who are in the generation right behind what I consider to be seniors today, 75 and older, this next generation, including mine, our expectation level is going to be much higher. We're not going to be willing to go to a hospital. We won't drive to a doctor's office. We're going to want to age in place. We're going to want the things that are delivered in our home to be much more world-class than the things we put up with in prior times. The good news is there's tremendous efficiency that comes from that. The bad news is we've got to make up a lot of ground in a very short period of time, because if some of the companies that are innovating today don't do it, there'll be somebody else who's brand new, who moves much more quickly and will effectively take that business over. So you asked the question about our business. I think much of what we do today is built around building capability that is multimodal, texting, telehealth, phone calls, physically reaching out, etc. But it is the best delivery method for the time and the situation that the member's in that is driving the economic decisions and the delivery mechanisms that are in place. The last thing I'll say on top of that, especially in the healthcare world, is the PCPs who we have today are incredibly overworked. I think they are underpaid for the type of work that they're going to do, and they're retiring in mass. And so as a result of that, we're going to find a big gap. And if we don't figure out a method to deliver services, whether that be nurse practitioners, other types of medical professionals, or more importantly, just being able to dial into other sections of the system, whether that be AI or some of the other digital solutions and technology solutions that are coming out right now, we're going to find that there's a tremendous amount of people who are outside of the system and have no method of taking care of themselves. And so we have to solve for that right now before we're really in a panic.
Tell me something, and there's a lot of music today around scribing, right, using AI, and then you touched upon how do you create those digital engagement channels, especially for the seniors. So where do you see AI playing in it? And especially in your world today, is it playing? Give some examples and how you're able to sort of scale it.
Yeah, I think the things are very exciting about AI. In fact, sometimes I have to scratch myself or pinch myself a little bit again and say, it seems like we were just talking about AI 2 years ago, and now all of a sudden, if you're not using AI, somebody thinks there's something wrong with your business. I think what we're going to find as we go through this process is we probably got a little too far out too quickly. And so we'll have a little bit of a pullback at some point. Right now, people throw that terminology out, AI, and a lot of the tool sets that are out there. I think if you dive a little deeper, the true AI functions that are out there are getting developed at a great rate, and I think that there's tremendous opportunity. I think we will stub our toe on a few things along the way. I think the market impact we saw just this week with NVIDIA losing a tremendous amount of value based on the Chinese things, etc. That again is a sign of the market. I don't think that stock market. I don't think it's a sign of where we really are with AI. But it's an exciting time if you think about if you're a clinician and historically you were spending time writing in handwriting or using your system to document, and now you can transcribe. And more importantly, that the systems that you've been using will say, well, Ashok, I see that you went to visit a member and in your clinical notes you've noted down A, B, C, and D. Did you also check for E, F, and G? We don't want to take away clinical judgment from the professionals who are on the front lines, but we want to aid the processes by which they're doing and take out the rote memorization and make that be not something they have to worry about. The system will make some recommendations. You can take them or lose them if you don't think that they're valuable, but there's tremendous capability that comes from my cycles don't have to be worried anymore about running through a checklist. The system's going to do that for them. The one thing, or the one caveat I think I'd throw out there, or the one caution I think that I'd throw out there is, this is very similar in my mind to what happened in the 1980s and 1990s when American business in particular tried to harness the value of outsourcing. And we said, well, we're going to outsource this, we're going to offshore this work, we're going to provide tremendous economic opportunity to people in the third world, and we really did do that. The challenge was, in this country, we were supposed to use all the innovation cycles to come up with the next and the next and the next idea. And instead, what ended up happening, in my opinion, was a lot of focus on just harvesting the economic benefits without getting back to the hardcore work of true innovation and really thinking through what we needed to do. And American business has really lost some of its preeminent position in terms of research and development to other places around the world, not because there aren't a ton of great ideas that are out there, but because we got a little bit lazy. And so I think as we go through this, AI is going to be there, but the real challenge for us is to remember, hey, I passed that off. What can I now use all of my intellect? What can I use all these vast amount of resources to really help me continue to improve the system?
Yeah, to your point of AI, maybe unpacking that a little bit more. So the way I see it is sort of three layers, right? So there is your AI hardware, software, right? The players who are playing that. Then there are your foundational models, large and small and BERT. And then there is an agentic AI layer, which is sort of your business logic layer that actually does something. And if I hear you right, the magic is in that agentic AI layer, the first layer where it actually interacts with user. And then depending upon how you sort of define that and create the experiences, that's where the magic will be as you go along. Is that true?
That's a much more eloquent way of putting it, Praveen. And I think what's going to happen over time is, if you think about this three-tiered model, the things that today are in layer 2 or layer 3 that are much more sophisticated are going to move further and further back down into 1. And that's where my point is, guess what? We better to be developing the next thing that's going into layer 2 or layer 3 so that we keep improving the system. Those models tend to educate themselves. So that means they're going to get better and better, which means the more things we throw at them, the better the solutions are going to become.
Yeah, right. I mean, maybe the Moore's law is playing here as well, right? The cost efficiency, the reasoning model that DeepSeek talks about, probably will get better over time. Say more on this venture dollars that are going into these sort of vertical AI shops, whether focusing on prior auth or payments or rev cycle, whatnot. But, how do you see that playing out?
So today I see a tremendous amount of money going into, as you mentioned, what I consider to be kind of typical, transaction-related type of activities. And as we said, those are probably the easiest to learn and to demonstrate the business case behind why it makes sense to automate those processes. We all know there's a fairly standard set of rules that exist out there for whether that be prior auth or even making some of the levels of medical decisions that we are. But really, it's going to be over time, we're going to want and expect more and more out of the system. So I think you'll see venture dollars flow in because people understand how to construct a model that shows what the business case is behind using AI for these. But I think as we get more sophisticated over this, we're going to throw these at more of like the critical types of research problems that we have. I can see a world in which vaccines and the things that we talked about for the development of the COVID vaccine, those would be the types of things we throw at an AI system because it will figure out this is really where we need to invest the money and the time. We can exclude some of the other things that would have been a waste of time and a waste of money and resources. One of the things we're going to find out from AI, I think, is just how valuable our time is and how many things we've been wasting time on all leading up to this. What we used to say was part of the Socratic method or part of the typical scientific method. Now all of a sudden we're gonna evaluate quickly and figure out that's not even worth investing going to look at. We've got systems that can do that. This is really where we want to develop.
Yeah, maybe a problem specification be more precise. I was reading something about the deep mind and all the work they're trying to do to sort of detect the different, targets for different sort of protein binder receptors, etc. And then, especially if you think of like single gene mutation issues, and there are few out there, I mean, that can be just, mind-bogglingly amazing if you think of, the people who you have to care of. So do you see that coming sort of next 2 years, next 5 years, just because the pace, and it's almost moving like a warp speed today. So do you see that happening fast enough?
I do. It's a great question. I think it's very similar to kind of like what you and I grew up with when we used to talk about Moore's law, that computer memory and the processing speed was, going at such an alarming rate. If I think about where we were 2 years ago with AI versus where we are now, if you don't have Gemini or something on your phone, people think something's wrong with you. I think, now our expectation level, the languages that the systems understand, all of that, even the colloquialisms we talk about are pretty much built into all of the models that we see. So yes, I absolutely think those things are going to improve. I also think, to your scientific question that you asked before, if you think about it, in the old days when we were younger, when you got a cold, you got sick for a couple of days, and then next thing you knew, you were back at work. Now when we get sick, almost all of the things we get, we're pretty much down for a week, maybe 2 weeks. And I'm sure that a function of this is the types of vaccines that we take, the usage of things like Purell, hand sanitizer, etc., have all gotten rid of all of the simplified bugs. It's the things that have evolved over time that have become much more worse. And so when we finally catch something, it's pretty significant. And that's true even for young kids. We see nowadays, many people contracting measles again. Scurvy is the most rampant disease in college in the U.S. It's a disease we thought we'd eradicated many years ago. And yet the reality is these things are resurfacing because they're new iterations of the diseases that are out there. So I think what we're going to find nowadays is, as we've discovered, so many more things turn out to be autoimmune deficiencies. I think those diseases are probably going to evolve over time also. And so we need to continue to pay attention to this. It's not like we're ever going to get done. There's always going to be something more that's coming around the corner, and we need to be preparing for that.
Something on exactly what you just said was, so imagine an emerging leader today, listening to this. What should they do? I mean, if I just hear, last 30 minutes of the span of, things that you talked about, how do they sort of become Ashok, say 10, 20, 30 years down the line?
Yeah, so two things that throw out there. One is I'm not sure anybody wants to be Ashok as much as just recognize that the models have evolved. And so what we consider to be success for you and me and our generation is going to be very different. And so I think everyone, instead of trying to be Praveen 2.0, should be John Smith 1.0 and try and develop their own skill set. The second thing I would say is success is defined in a number of ways. And I think after you've reached some base level of financial security, then what becomes interesting to you requires a little bit of introspection to say, what really motivates me? And I would suggest to most people that they should check periodically about, are they self-actualizing? Are they finding the things that they do with their time, not just their professional work, but are the things that they do with the investment of their time really things that find them recharging or keeping their interest level up? Are they feeling fulfilled? And most importantly, are they finding that they are continuing to evolve? Because nothing is more frustrating than looking back over a time period and saying, I wasted my time. The last comment I'll make is, as I said, probably maybe 15, 20 minutes ago in our discussion, I think that the typical model is going to change. And so therefore, what the job is, our expectation should be that we are going to change jobs. We're going to do different things, and likely in different companies, multiple times in our career. So the real question is, what is the inflection, or to your term now, what is the turning point? Am I at a turning point in my life? Is it professional? Is it personal? and we should be looking for when the next curve is coming so we get prepared for it. We shouldn't be surprised, and we shouldn't be not excited about the opportunity to make a change. I think it's very similar to when you were teaching me about your motorcycle bike racing, Praveen, and some of the things that come with it. But I'm sure you're motivated periodically by, I want the next experience. I want to try it in a different place. I want to try a different bike. I want to look at this. I want to talk to other people about it. That's the same level of excitement we should have about our professional and our personal lives.
You're right. Especially when you're, riding to the mountains, you can get to some hard leans and some difficult turns, and you almost have to just learn to find a way to come out of it. I think that there's not, prescription out there that you need to sort of follow through on that. It's hard.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. I think also the models that existed before, as we've talked about, don't exist going into the future. The discussion topics you've raised today, I don't think 10 years ago we'd have thought that's what we were talking about today. I think we would be talking about AI, we wouldn't be talking about the net impact of the Chinese investments or the stock market on a global basis, et cetera. So world's evolving at an alarming rate, or at least an exciting rate, I should say.
Of course. There's something you talk a lot about, and even in private conversation has come up, is how do you make people feel when you work with them, and not necessarily about what you do or did. Say more on that part.
Yeah, I think I've been very fortunate in my career to have mentors, leaders, advisors, et cetera, who've been really good about passing lessons. One thing I would do for your group on the phone is I would encourage them to seek out people and ask for feedback. It's very rare that somebody who's in a more senior position is not willing to share feedback. And if they aren't, that doesn't mean everybody else is the same way. Second thing I would say is you don't have to take all the feedback. Just because somebody gives you something doesn't mean necessarily they're right. Different people have different attitudes about life, and each of us develops our own style over time. I'll never be Dr. Praveen Sodhi, and I don't think I want to evolve necessarily to do that because of many things that you do better than I do. But there's certainly lessons that you've shared with me that I've said, gosh, that piece of advice that Praveen gave me was super valuable as I move forward in the next thing. So I would suggest to people, pull pieces of evidence from folks who you've seen that you want to incorporate, and also don't be hesitant to exclude things that they do that you don't like. There are certain behaviors that people have where I just can't do what that other person did. It's not my style. But the most important, I think, where we find the satisfaction is when the light bulb goes on for somebody who works for us. They're on your team, spent time, you've either explained a business concept, you've shown them how a contract can be successful, you've taught them about what to look for the next time they're reviewing a contract. And boy, when the light bulb goes on and they get it and they feel like something, that they've learned something and they've executed well, etc. Boy, there's nothing like it in professional development, at least in my experience. I find that more exciting than most anything else that I've accomplished in my professional career.
Tell me something. Is it easy to be receptive to feedback? And if not, how you can be?
Boy, I think it took me some time before I was at a stage where I could take feedback well. I used to think that it was always a criticism, and I'll harken back to two things. One is, look, any criticism is an opportunity to learn. So people are trying to be helpful. If they're investing the time in you by giving you feedback, chances are it's because they genuinely care. The second thing I'd say is, again, just because you get criticism or feedback does not mean you have to take it. I have gotten a performance evaluation, I think at least once, if not twice, every year of my professional career, almost every year of my professional career. I'm very unlikely at this stage of my professional life to make huge changes in who I am. Frankly, who I am is what's led me to the level of success and professional and personal satisfaction I've got. But that doesn't mean I'm not willing to listen to feedback at this stage. So I think that's a thing that we take, is we think that it's naturally you have to be take every bit of it and do everything and modify who you are. So my suggestion would be, yeah, absolutely listen to the feedback you get. Have confidence in who you are and what you think you need to do to get better. Almost all of us know intuitively what it is, but also give yourself a break. This is not an easy thing. Professional life, whether you're in the US or China or Japan or anywhere else, or our personal lives, are all challenging. We live in incredibly challenging times. And I see a lot of people beat themselves up on a regular basis when they need to stop and just take it easy on themselves, take it easy on one another, and recognize it's a long career. And so just got to stop periodically, smell the roses, take a little bit of feedback, but enjoy the journey.
Love it. Love it that you said that. So have you found something recently that was sort of revealing to you about yourself?
Yeah, I think the number one thing for me that I found in the last little bit has been taking time for myself. So I think, as I've said, unfortunately, the payoff pitch for texting, email, everything else is you literally could be on your phone, on your computer, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I tell people who work with me, you can always make another phone call, you can always write another email, you can always be reading something one way or the other. But to really stop and recharge requires a level of discipline to say, I'm going to get off the grid and I'm going to do something for myself, and that you shouldn't feel guilty about it. So in the last 2 years, actually probably the last 3 years, I've made really a calculated effort to do that. The second thing I've said, and this is probably over the last 5 years, is to really take a few chances. And I make a little bit of a joke with my children about this, but I said, look, at the end of the day, nobody's going to starve and everybody's got a roof over their head. And so I think 99.99999% of people in the world would switch places with me without even a question. So that means we need to stop and think about just how lucky we are and fortunate in the circumstances that we're at. And so therefore you should take a couple of chances. They don't have to be crazy chances, but it doesn't mean you have to be worried that you're not going to be successful. What's success? How would you ever recognize what the next opportunity is if you weren't willing to try some things? And as I told you at the very beginning, I've made some mistakes along the way, but I've also taken some chances that have really worked out well for me. And if I was super conservative, I don't think I would have.
It's heartening to hear that, because that was sort of even the genesis of why I started this. Moving from a practicing doc to health tech was a wild decision when I made that. And I remember my sis and my dad were like, "What is this guy up to?" It's just amazing. Say something about in the journey. You will find interacting with and having to deal with negative people. How do you do that?
Oh boy, I think a couple things that jump to mind about that. First off, through this is just because somebody else is negative or has criticism or whatever, one, you have no idea what's going on in their life. And so sometimes it's good to just leave it alone, let them say what they need to say because they need a venue to let something go. Second of all, and I spoke about this before, just because somebody levels negative comments doesn't mean you have to take them. I think in your mind, you can be even keeled and let that process just waft over you. Third thing is not to react immediately. I think many times the message gets buried in the verbiage. And so what we react to immediately is either we have a trigger or somebody uses a word you don't like, the way that they phrase it, the way that they look at you. Who knows what the circumstances are, but not to overreact. I think the same thing is don't underreact. I mean, you may get feedback from other people that is very valuable that you're just not taking into consideration. But I think it is a human emotion at times to be defensive of yourself, of your family, and most importantly, the people who work for you. And so if your natural reaction is to think, well, that's not fair, that's not right, you're probably right. But that doesn't mean you necessarily need to react out loud. You can just keep that to yourself one way. And the most important thing is not give the power to other people. When you react like that, you are immediately yielding to them, and then you've lost control of the situation. And, Praveen, you can remind me of this the next time I overreact to something, but the reality is that's the number one message. It's no different than when you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off. If you react, you've completely yielded control to that person. And better to let those things go in the great scheme of things, because rarely does an immediate reaction play out.
Yeah, those 3 second, 5 second rules, right, in life sort of does play a big difference. Do you believe in God?
I do. I'm a fervent believer. I think I'm hard pressed to look at the majesty of the world, or even just the microcosm that is my own personal life, and not think that there is somebody up above who's looking out for me, who's provided this tremendous opportunity. I have such rich relationships in my life, including ours. I have a wonderful family. I know the level of sacrifices that people have made. It just does not, there's no way that I could understand that the world operated the way that it did if there was not somebody or some entity that was involved in making things happen.
What was the hardest thing you had to do to get to where you are today?
I think the hardest thing that I've had to do over the course of my professional career is recognize a couple of places where I was not going to be successful and leave of my own volition. I think we all have a natural tendency in the professional world to think that we've got to sit and grind it out, and that leaving is a sign of weakness. I think it's exactly the opposite. When you recognize in a particular situation that there is not a way to be successful, I think it's very important that you do what is necessary for yourself and frankly for the organization that you work in, to say, look, I'm just not a fit. I mean, I recognize this. I want to be successful. I'm not saying you should just walk away. I think you should try and communicate what the challenges are. But if the place is fundamentally not moving in the direction, you're doing neither yourself nor that company, nor probably your family, the service and providing the level of respect that you need. And so I think in all of those circumstances, it becomes very important. And only later on in my career have I really had the guts to leave a couple places that we did not see eye to eye.
Yeah, that can always be challenging, yes. So what's the most common thought for Ashok that comes to his mind every day?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a multi-flavored thing, and I would just throw this out. It is largely related to there's an incredible amount of opportunity that presents itself every day. And so don't be turned off to opportunity as you sit down. You refer to them as turning points. I think of them as being turning points also, but it's much easier for me to see the turning points in my life in my rearview mirror than it was when they were coming towards me. And so I wish I'd spent more time looking and thinking, gosh, if I'd just gotten involved in X or Y, it's not even professional success. I think it's just much more, it would have been interesting to have taken control of the situation instead of letting the situation take control of me at that particular time. I think the second thing is we're incredibly fortunate people to live in this day and time. The level of evolution, the things that are happening in the world are very exciting. 20, 30 years ago, the types of topics we talked about were not nearly as interesting as they are. I think the third thing that I would throw out is relationships are critically important. And so don't ever ignore the opportunity to have a great relationship with somebody. You will get burned a couple of times with somebody who breaks your heart, but chances are much better that the investment of time pays off. And again, we talked about this before. When you interact with some people, you don't know what they're going through. We've all seen the picture of the iceberg where only the top is above and you don't know how deep it is. But I think the level of compassion that we share with other people, it is an incredibly challenging world for many, many people these days. When you think about mental health issues, you think about global issues, you think about the aging of America, there are just so many challenges that are out there. I think empathy and compassion are going to be critically important as we embrace this next time period. And then the last thing that I will say is we've got to get out of our focus of just thinking about the U.S. I think we're right on the precipice of a true global economy. I think those opportunities present themselves, but we need to embrace them and look for more ways to be looking out than just focusing in. I'm a big believer in we need to rebuild the manufacturing base, and we need to do the hard work, but I'm also recognizing that the world has become an incredibly more productive place because we've started to find the highest and best use of each of the activities that are there. And if you think about the tremendous economic growth in the third world, if you think about the amount of scientific discovery, et cetera, all of that has been born by us farming out and sharing the load across globalists and not thinking about people who sit across a border as being the enemy, but hey, between us, we're going to have to solve the problem.
Tell me something, given the hyper-connected, hyper-distracted world that we live in today, you touched upon something that sort of touched me was the empathy. And, as you go through the day, weeks, years, that part sort of becomes a bit sort of atrophied out at times. So how do you sort of, build it and then maintain that, big or small company that you're working with, but how do you do that?
It is a challenge in this day and time. I think to your comment from before where we talk about, hey, there's always a text going on or there's a WhatsApp or Facebook or this thing or that social media, to say nothing of literally the job, managing the people that you have, trying to stay ahead of technology trends, all the other things that are there, you really can get burned out very quickly. So I guess I'd blend it together. One, as we talked about before, take time for yourself. You're no use to anybody if you're not well rested and healthy. So I think I always recommend to people, please spend some time on yourself, 15 minutes, an hour, meditating, reading, whatever it is that you end up doing, because you'll find that you have more energy for doing it. And I think the other thing is, it is overwhelming to try and demonstrate the same level of empathy to all those people. So my suggestion is try and find one or two things every day that demonstrate that you are doing something that makes you feel good about yourself and that you are trying to take care of somebody else, and be satisfied with one or two. It's much better to do one thing very well than it is to do 5 things at a mediocre level. And we all feel the same level of pressure, which is we're trying to do so much every day, all the time. It's impossible. You cannot be successful. So when I was much younger, I think we all grew up in a world where we used to think that the people who reacted that way and only did one thing were selfish or lazy. I think the reality is they're probably the smart ones, and they've lasted the longest and have less heart disease and other things because they've kept things manageable. It's probably a middle ground, but I would just hearken to people, just focus on trying to knock out a couple of things every day, and you'll be shocked at how much more fulfilling your life is.
Yeah, that's very well said. I was looking at a cartoon recently. It was talking about, when you lived in 1900, what the world will look like in year 2000. So what's Ashok's forecast? So today we are in year 2500. Where will the world be, say 2600? What do you think?
Yeah, I think 2600. So a couple things I think will end up evolving. I think one is we'll do a much better job of taking care of the planet, and I'm not getting
I hope
into
so.
Here we are worrying about being green and global warming and all that kind of stuff. I think we'll just start to recognize exactly what's important about how to take care of the planet, how to take care of one another. Second of all, I think it is absolutely critically clear to me at this stage that our exploration of space is going to be particularly important. That's not just colonizing other planets. I think what we're going to find when we get out there is there are much more effective and efficient ways of doing things, whether that be growing plants or it be engineering things in zero gravity or developing some of the other types of technology and scientific solutions. I think we're going to find that once we get out of Earth's gravity, literally, that there's going to be just an exhaustive level of things that go on. I think the last thing is that the world's energy problems will have been solved by the time we get to that. And so the things we struggle with today about are we going to be gas powered, are we going to be wind powered, solar powered, nuclear powered, etc., will be discussion topics. There'll be an endless supply of energy, whether that comes from hydrogen or comes from some external point. So if you start to remove all of these restrictions that we've had on our growth and how we were going to do things, well, boy, you're out of excuses for why we're not making things be much better. And so I think we're going to find ourselves at a big crossroads, which is now with no restrictions, what are we really going to want to try to accomplish? Are we going to want to conquer other planets? Are we going to want to be interested in doing things in a much more effective way? Are we going to be looking at better relationships? What are the things that we want to continue to do? Last thing I'll say is I think we'll do a much better job also at the exploration of the oceans. And I think what we'll start to find is we've barely scratched the surface on the other, animals and plants and things like that exist in our world. And we've been naive all this time about what great things continue to live on our planet. And I think whether it is scuba diving or even snorkeling, we're going to start to find that there's all kinds of exciting things that we're just starting to get, even in 2600, just starting to scratch the surface. It's going to be an exciting time to be alive.
Oh, absolutely. I was reading something, and they said that we today probably know no more than 9 to 10% of the ocean space. As to what's down under our feet itself is something we don't know much about. That's fascinating.
For sure. And I think, who knows, maybe we start drilling into the core of the Earth too and find other things that are existing down there. So we sometimes think that the Earth is already solved, and I think we're not even close. Absolutely. I think back to your question about do I believe in God, it seems incredibly unlikely that out of this large a solar system, etc., that we would be the only place that's inhabited with sentient life. I mean, it just, and I'm not even talking about the UFOs and the people who sit around talking about Area 51. I think it's highly unlikely that statistically that's the way that things go. think, again, we may very well find that we're on the low end of the spectrum too, and that's going to be a surprising moment for all of us when we find that there are people who are much smarter, much more capable.
There's a lot of talk around longevity, and I heard someone say that we may be the generation that we don't die. Do you believe that? What do you think of it?
I don't. I think that we will continue to evolve, and obviously people's lifespans are growing by leaps and bounds. But I think that the human psyche is not built for living past a particular age. I think at some point we think that we've experienced what we need to experience, and it's time to hand the keys over. So do I see us continue to evolve? Sure. The fastest growing segment of the population are people who are aging into their hundreds. I think we've all seen that. It's not necessarily blue zones, etc. But I think there's also just a natural tiredness that comes from living these experiences for an extended period of time. So I think we're going to find that we come to a natural limit. For me, maybe it's 120, 130, 140. But at that stage, I think we're going to kind of be, yeah, enough's enough. I'm good. I've had a good life. It's time for me to hand over the keys. And frankly, I'm out of money. So I better cash in my chips and move on to the great beyond. You know, the corollary to that, Praveen, also, I think, is if you are somebody who believes in the great beyond or has beliefs about from a religious perspective on, heaven or something else like that, I'm sure there's also going to be a stage in which you're anxious to catch up with the people who are already there. And I know I desperately miss my parents, my grandparents. There are moments where, excuse me for just a second, there are moments where they were around to talk to, and I miss them greatly. So there'll be a period in my life where I really just want to go and be with them for a while.
Yeah, take a moment. It is important, yes. In fact, my dad told me that, almost all of us will be forgotten maybe 10, 15, 20 years after we are gone, at best. And then after 50 years, people won't even remember the name. So I think whether you stay for 50 years, 150 years, or 200, it doesn't matter. Make that time count in some real way. For people you live with and love. So that matters a lot. Absolutely, I think well said. What's in front of you?
I think a couple things that jump out. I mean, one, as I said, there's an endless supply from a professional satisfaction that stays out there with not only developing the next group of leaders who are there and passing on whatever lessons I may have learned. And again, don't expect them to take all my lessons and duplicate them. I share my information and see what ends up coming from that. But I'm anxious about that. I think the second thing I'm excited about is what comes from what I consider to be the next phase of maybe slowing my professional life down, being much more involved in the charity work and spending time with my family as they continue to evolve, get married, have their kids, and spending time with my wife, traveling and seeing some portions of the world. And then, look, this ongoing situation with what we're going to do to take care of the health of our country and the people across the world, we have got to do a better job. And as I kind of mentioned before, so much of this, all of the excuses we've had all along are starting to dissipate, which means our expectation level of one another should really go up. We should be thinking about how can we do a better job, and what's my role in that? What's Praveen's role in that? What's the role of the person down the street? How do I set the expectations and make sure we hold each other accountable for the things that are going on? Last, I would say is somehow or the other, we have got to dial down the political rhetoric, not just in the US, but in the world, and get back to a world in which we're starting to think about how do we continue to increase the quality of life and the quality of the situation for everybody, as opposed to pointing fingers back and forth with the types of situations that are going on. You would have thought at this stage, with the amount of challenges that we've had, that we would have grown closer and closer together, and yet, unfortunately, we seem to have grown further and further apart. And even the pandemic, or if you think back to September 11th, or some of the other horrible things that have happened across the world, the war in Ukraine, the situation in Gaza today, those things are now bringing us together. And I'm not sure what it's going to take, but something's got to happen for us to figure out that those people are not my enemy. They're people just like I am. They have their challenges, and somehow or the other we got to solve.
Ashok, what a privilege. It has been a fascinating conversation, and we can go on and on, but just hearing you, the stories, experiences, the journey, And I tell you, what touched me most was the impact, the empathy that you talked about. So keep doing what you're doing, my friend. Amazing.
Thank you so much for this, Praveen. I think just what a wonderful format, and I love the terminology that you use about turning points. I think it's really just a wonderful way to really look at life and look at the situations that present it, and most importantly, to embrace them. So thank you for considering me worthy of this type of an opportunity. It's really, really been an honor and a privilege to be able to sit and spend some time with you.